Hey everybody, my name is Ian. I work at the Fort Worth Public Library, and every second Saturday of the month we do the Maker Showcase. Today I have a good friend of mine, Tania, who is a maker, but she's not exactly the maker you might be thinking of. Hey Tania, how are you?
Hi there, Ian. Thanks for having me. I'm fine, thank you.
It's great to have you, and I'm so glad that I could have you. Now, first of all, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. You are not from Texas, are you?
No, I am not. I wonder if anybody can guess where I actually am from. I'll give you a little clue. We have haggis running around, and there are things called bagpipes, and lots of mountains and lots of rain. I'm from Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. It is good to have you from across the pond, as they say. It's so great to have you, and I'm so glad for things like Skype, where we're able to talk to each other over this long distance, because I normally wouldn't be able to have you actually at the makerspace, so it's great to have you in this way. Now, I talked a little bit that you're a maker, but it's kind of not exactly what people think when they think of maker. Can you tell us a little bit about your maker skill or maker talent?
I certainly can. I'm primarily an artist. I primarily paint portraits. That's kind of my jam. But equally, I also do a shed load of other different things. So if I'm not painting or drawing, I could be crocheting, I could be making jewellery. I'm currently learning how to do wire wrapping. I could be knitting, a whole host of different things. I'd be here all day if I had to list all the different things that I can do. Sewing,
Yeah,
quilting.
yeah, I think a lot of makers, a lot of times, they'll dabble in a lot of different types of projects. So it sounds like you're just a regular maker at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So your primary one is painting, right? So
Yes.
painting and making portraits and stuff. Let's talk a little bit about your main one here. And first of all, what's your background in? Are you an artist by trade, or is this a hobby for you?
Um, I guess you could argue that it is a hobby, but I kind of try to stay away from labels like that because I do consider myself as an artist. And technically, I do sell my work as well. So it's a little bit of both, really. Um, I I loved art as a kid. Absolutely loved it. When I was at school, I took art as a subject. Much to my mum's displeasure, she wasn't really happy that I took art because in order to do art, I had to drop one of my other subjects. And she didn't think that being an artist was going to be particularly beneficial for my future. There is no future in art because, there's no money to be made, there's no career to be had, that kind of thing. And so, I've always loved being creative. But unfortunately, there were certain things that certain people outside of school kind of said. I won't go into details or who it actually was. But as a teenager, most teenagers have a little bit of insecurity more than adults. And that insecurity was kind of telling me that the reason they were telling me these things was because I wasn't good enough. So I stopped. And I kind of lived my life and I went in a different direction. I ended up working in an office, which is the one thing that I always said as a child that I would never do because I didn't want to. But it was the only other option that I thought was possible. And then I got into adulthood. And in adulthood, I kind of became a little bit more bolshy, you know. I decided that actually I was going to kind of creep back into creativity. So that was when I started doing a little bit of the crochet and, things like that. And I'd done scrapbooking as well. And I had been looking online for things about scrapbooking, and I came across something called art journaling. And this took my interest essentially. And so I started looking more into that and I started doing art journaling. And from there, I started to gain my confidence back with using paints and things. And so I started drawing faces. And from there, I then got into portrait painting. So it kind of evolved from art journaling into portrait painting. Now, I've kind of waffled a little bit and kind of, I hope I've answered your question. Has that answered your question enough?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually going to dive in because people watching this may not know exactly what art journaling is. So could you talk a little bit about what it is and why it inspired you?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Art journaling is different things to different people. It's essentially pause for thought. How do I? It's actually very difficult to explain what art journaling is because it's so different for everybody. Everybody experiences it. So I guess in a nutshell, art journaling is documenting with pictures. Some people will do more of their pictures as stamping or as drawing or as collage. I tend to do more drawing and painting within my art journals. In fact, I have an art journal here if you wanted to see an example of what an art journal page was.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at it. Oh, wow.
So this is the kinds of things that I like to do in my art journal because it allows me to play with the paints to see which colours go. It allows me to just not think about things, not think about necessarily like rendering and, you know, proper techniques for actually doing a portrait. And it just allows me to play. So I tend to kind of do things like this. I mean, here's even one that's kind of not quite finished yet, never got around to it. So there's like texture and there's a little bit of drawing in here as well. It's all about experimentation essentially. And I think that's probably the best way to describe what art journaling is. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anybody who's interested in art journaling, you know, don't be afraid of what mediums you have. Don't be afraid of what you use and how you use it. Just, you know, put things to paper and play around and see what happens, because those art journals are for you. You don't have to share them. You don't have to, you know, show them off. You're kind enough to do that today. So thank you very much for showing that off. But I think that's also something that can kind of hold people back, is they don't want other people to see their art because they fear that it's not good enough, as some people have told you in the past, which is not true. Everybody has amazing talent. So yeah, that really kind of helps lay out the stage of what art journaling is. And that path kind of took you to portrait painting. And can you talk about your portraits and just kind of your process?
Yeah, certainly. The evolution of starting to paint portraits came from drawing faces in my art journals. And it progressed to watercolors. I don't have any of my first watercolors here, but I'm not even sure I would actually share it because it was so awful. But equally, maybe one of these days I actually will, just to show people that, you know, don't be too hard on yourselves, because you can actually go from awful to, you know, something that you can actually be proud of. And I say it in that way rather than from bad to good, because ultimately what is good? You know, because it's about you feeling confident enough about your work rather than it necessarily being what other people consider to be good about our work. And I think that's the difficulty with art, is that there are so many different opinions, some of them quite sound and valid, and others are a little bit questionable. But equally, we still all are entitled to our opinion. I think the difficulty comes when it gets expressed in a way that is not welcome. It's not being asked for. And I think that kind of creates that barrier again, that fear for people actually, you know, getting into to art, and you saw that journal page was quite a rudimentary drawing of a face, which is very different to something like this.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite realistic and really well rendered.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Or equally, I can sometimes take the notion to go more whimsical and a little less realistic, but it's still a little more rendered than the pencil drawing that was in my art journal. The one last painting that I do have here, which is like the pièce de résistance, this is my favorite, and I think it always will be, because this is my grandson, one of my grandchildren, and it's a self-portrait. I had been feeling a little bit down and fed up, and a little bit, dare I say, unloved. I was having one of those fed up days. I know I'm not unloved. I know in my heart I'm not unloved, but I was having one of those fed up days. And I wanted to paint something that was meaningful and that actually really showed the beauty of me, and to show how I can look pretty, for want of a better word. And so that's where that portrait was born from.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I remember correctly, that one took you a little while. You took some time creating that one, if I remember.
That's correct. Yeah. It did take a long time because it was so detailed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also had my grandson as well. I did take a long time. I mean, we're talking months. I wasn't at it every day for those months, but I would take long periods of time away from the easel and not actually do anything for fear of messing it up. So, as good as I am, even I have those fears of messing something up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also a good reminder that, it's okay to step away from your work, and it's okay to step away from it and give your mind that mental break that you need in order to make sure that it's a successful piece of artwork, successful robot, successful code, successful whatever you're working on. That doesn't just apply to painting, that applies to just about every discipline.
Absolutely, yeah, without a doubt. Because I think for most human beings, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but for me, most human beings, they have a desire to do things right the first time. And actually, we're not going to get it right the first time. And even if we don't ever get it right, that doesn't mean that we have to not do something. Because again, we're back to what is right. What's good, what's bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all about perspective at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you showed the paintings, there was kind of a progression. There was realism, there was like that sort of whimsical kind of look to them. Is there one that you prefer more than another?
Oh, no, there isn't, I have to say. It really comes down to what mood I'm actually in at the time I'm wanting to paint. Sometimes if I'm feeling particularly stressed, I may gravitate more towards something that is less detailed, because that way I could take a step back from the easel with my brush completely at the tip. So I've got no control over it and just simply paint and not care. I don't care that I'm, painting out of the lines. In fact, I don't even have any lines, because a lot of the time I will actually start a painting without a drawing. Shock horror. But yeah. I like painting outside the lines.
Yeah, it's all about the process, and some of the most famous artists are known for not staying in the lines and not keeping the status quo. So I think it's important to remind everybody that it's okay to color outside the lines.
Absolutely.
So you talked a little bit about not painting every day, and that painting took a while because you didn't paint every day. Um, is it like, do you do it in your spare time? Is it when you feel like it? I know some artists, they have free time, but they just don't get that inspiration. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about your like thought process on going in and like walking into the painting room and being like, yes, I'm going to do this, but then I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about your process?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It kind of, I work part-time. I do have a job, but I work part-time. But because I'm only working 3 days a week, it means that I have a lot of time to be able to work on my creativity. And, you know, in terms of inspiration, sometimes it's just a feeling. It's just that overwhelming feeling, that urge that I want to paint. I don't have a Scooby what I'm wanting to paint, but I just know I want to paint. Those are usually the times where I kind of go and I find, a big bit of paper, and that's when I do the stand back and just go for it, and see what happens. Other times it may have been that I've been watching a YouTube video, for example, or I've just been recently watching the Artist of the Year, Portrait Artist of the Year program that was that's here on Sky Arts, and they recently, because of the situation that we're currently in globally, they recently started doing a weekly live paint along, and they actually had a famous person as the sitter. And so on a Sunday, or a couple of the Sundays, I actually found I wasn't working, which I was absolutely surprised about because I generally tend to work most weekends. So I found myself off and was painting along, which was absolutely fantastic, because even though I was kind of waking up thinking, oh, I really don't want to get up yet, I got up and I got on with it. And so that in itself kind of helped me to paint on that particular day. So kind of back to the question, and in terms of the process, it really does depend on how I feel on the day, what I actually have in the pipeline, and whether or not I'm going to paint or whether I'm going to do something else. Because sometimes I don't actually have the inclination to paint. Sometimes I just feel like doing something else. And that's where I might do a little bit of jewelry making, or, something along those lines. In terms of the actual painting process, I like to use acrylic paints for the most part, but I have dabbled a little bit in oils as well, and sometimes in pan pastels. So what you were saying about, earlier on about, there's lots of different mediums that can be used. Well, I certainly use a lot of different ones. So yeah, I'm usually creative daily, but not necessarily painting every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Either some sort of, I know some people that I know will, they do big pieces of art, whether it's sewing, whether it's painting, whether it's paper crafting, whatever they do, but they may not feel like pulling out all their tools or pulling everything out to put together a big piece, and so they'll just take their journal and do a little scribble in it that day, and that's what satisfies them for that day, art wise. And then maybe in the future they'll take that artwork and scale it up and make it a full piece. But that little sketch provides them that stepping stone and that art outlet that they need for that day, that they can then use in the future. So I assume you kind of do that as well, grabbing a napkin or two and sketching something out and filing it away for another day.
Yeah, no, I've done that. And the other thing I do is I will actually use my iPad, and I will do something digitally, because I don't have to worry about the mess with my iPad. I can actually sit and watch television and draw on the iPad. So, there's lots of different things that I can actually do to kind of scratch that itch if I so choose to, because sometimes I don't want to go all the way up the stairs. Currently my easel is actually in my bedroom. And so I have to go up the stairs and I have to make sure that I've got the water in, and I make sure, I get my palette all sorted. And it can take me half an hour to just get ready to paint. And sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes I just cannot be bothered.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the
So I do
feeling.
something else instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially because a lot of us, I mean, we've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've been spending a lot more time at home, whether it's for work or whatever. And so a lot of our spaces are kind of blending together. They're no longer, individual rooms, or, some of them are offices for several people at points. So this has definitely been, over the past time, it's been adjusting and learning how to deal with that. So it's interesting that, a lot of people may not have the space to set up a full craft room or art studio or whatever, and that we're all kind of working through these in our own little spaces. And that can also kind of play a little factor into our creative process. Sharing that space in your bedroom can feel daunting at times, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I don't do oils in my bedroom, for example, because I sleep there. So, I'm not painting in oils because of the potential fumes if I use any mediums. The actual oil paints themselves aren't as dangerous as people make them out to be. It is actually more the mediums that you actually use to thin your paints down and things that are the bigger problem than anything else. I think oil paints are relatively safe. I wouldn't eat them, but they're relatively safe. It's as I said, it's the mediums. But yeah, the fact that I'm painting in my room, there's not a lot of space. I'm not really able to kind of stand back as far from the easel as I can if I've got my own art studio, which I used to have, but personal circumstances resulted in me having to give it up just for a short period of time. We'll eventually get it back, but just not at this moment in time. So I'm making do with what I've got. The desk at the back of me, it's a roll-top desk. I use that. I will get one of the tabletop easels and I will sit and use that for the oil paints. In fact, I do actually have an oil painting sitting here. This is one of my oil paintings.
Oh, nice. Love it.
So, it just depends on what takes my fancy at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also, you could also say that there's maybe you don't get that same breathing room, even metaphorically, for your artwork, having to cram it into the space that you're in. So I think that we all need to kind of recognize that we've been going through a period of time, and it's okay that you might feel frustrated with your artwork and everything. Now, people who are watching, I've had many types of makers here on the channel. And one other thing that I kind of ask my guests who aren't typically considered makers, because some people may not exactly consider painting a making skill. What do you have to say to that?
Potatoes. It's a word. It's kind of putting us into those categories and labeling us. And I'm not a big fan of labels. I respect that, people do, and that's absolutely fine. But equally, I don't think that we should really label us because, I paint and I may be creating as opposed to making, but are we just nitpicking? And if you wanted to nitpick and say, okay, well, it's creating and not making, but of that art, I then can take that art and I do make things. I have actually made these bookmarks. That's from fact that not a lot of people know about me is I'm a photographer as well, and that is actually this part here is actually from a photograph that I had taken.
Oh, that's awesome.
This one here that was done digitally, and So yeah, and to answer your question, I think potatoes, it's about the wording, and it's fine if people don't consider me to be a maker.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you answered that very well. And I do want to remind everybody, like, being a maker doesn't just include programming and robotics and 3D printing. It encompasses so many disciplines and so many different aspects of those disciplines. So if you don't feel like you're a maker, you probably are. You just haven't quite thought of what scope of a maker you are. So I highly encourage everybody, if you have some sort of making skill, keep at it. Don't feel pressured to not say that you're a maker, because we are all makers, even though we may not be doing the same thing or be in that box of what is so-called maker. So for those who might be interested in getting into painting, wanting to start painting, what advice do you have for them? What tips? Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, obviously there's different styles of art. There's different styles of painting. There's different styles of drawing. There's a school of thought that suggests that you can't paint until you draw, which is actually nonsense. You can paint before you can draw. It's a nice skill to have. And I would fully encourage people to, practice drawing. So if that's, something that they want to start, a place that they want to start at, then they can do so. But I guess probably to simplify the answer to this, I would probably suggest looking at art journaling, because then that way you can explore a little bit of everything that you want to try. So you can try simply drawing in a journal, or you can try, working with paints. And because it's an art journal, you don't have to be precious about your paints. You can, because obviously there's lots of people who want to be creative but don't necessarily have the money to do so. And, let's face it, being creative can become quite a bit of a rabbit hole. And when you go down said rabbit hole and you buy this and you buy that and you buy the next thing, and it all starts to mount up. So I guess ultimately, if you don't have the money, keep it simple. Look at what are your cheaper alternatives, and please, please, please don't listen to other artists who tell you that you can only progress if you buy pro paints, because that's just nonsense. I didn't start with pro paints. I do have them now and I do work with them, but I didn't start with them, and I think it really is about the person themselves deciding what it is that they like. So maybe looking on YouTube, for example, it seems to be the go-to, or Pinterest, and actually deciding where it is that they want to potentially get to, and then kind of work back to find out how can they get there. I'm always open for anybody who wants to contact me to ask any questions. Then they can do that. That's somewhere that they can start. If there's somebody that is on the platform who's teaching or who is sharing and demonstrating, because I wouldn't necessarily call myself a teacher. I would say I'm more demonstrating, and I'm more kind of trying to get a message across that the painting is not the most important part of being a creative. Having the right mindset and the right way of thinking is what really propels us forward. There is an element of, learning the techniques. I get that. I'm not saying you can necessarily do anything without learning any techniques, but equally, you kind of learn the techniques when you get in the right headspace. So it's a bit like the chicken and the egg. Which came first? The techniques or the mindset? Or is it the mindset to get the techniques? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely it does. Absolutely.
Has that answered your question? Because I wonder if I've gone off on a tangent there.
No, I think you did. And I think you touched on something very important too. So many of these maker maker skills and maker talents, when you get more involved with it, become very expensive. And as a teacher that I definitely enjoy listening to, she says that you don't have to have those pro materials. Work within your budget, find what you have the budget for and work with those, because anything that you work with can be just fine and work amazingly, even if you don't have the budget for those super pro materials. Because just because you have them doesn't magically make you this expert where you can do things.
I mean, there is an element where, once you get into, if you're progressing or you're wanting and you have the money to buy the pro stuff, then there is a potential that you might have a little bit better of an experience. For example, with watercolors, unless you have really good watercolor paper, you could potentially be fighting with the paints. And it's, if you're looking at somebody with all these nice blooms going on, and that's the kind of art you want to do, your cheaper watercolors on copy paper is not going to give you that effect. But equally, it's not going to stop you from having a good time either. So it really depends on where you're at and what you're actually wanting to get out of it. Acrylic paints, for example, I've seen a lot of people spraying them and watering them down too much. If you're looking at selling your work, if you water them down too much, then there's a potential that it could fall off of the canvas if it's done in a certain way. But again, most people don't get to that point where they're, going to be charging £1,000 and upwards for their artwork unless they progress to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So just go with what you want. Do what you want, because at the end of the day, what other people think about our work is none of our business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really put a exclamation point on that and said it perfectly. So yeah, absolutely. Now, you touched a little bit about using an iPad, and that's something that a lot of people have at their homes these days, is an iPad, and they probably have some sort of artistry type of app already installed. I know I have several installed on my iPad. Can you talk a little bit about, what's the difference, and is there a difference between your physical medium and working on the iPad?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it does feel a bit strange to begin with. There's no two ways about it. If you're used to drawing on paper, it does feel different. And, there are the naysayers who say that digital art isn't art. Again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. That's nonsense. Because art is what you believe it to be. You as individually, we decide what art is to us. There is nobody on this planet that is going to tell me what art is. Nobody. When I was a teenager, perhaps, but not anymore. Nobody can tell me what art is, except me. But digital art it's actually really good for beginners, because you actually have the ability to, dare I say it, trace. Because, to learn how to draw, it's all to do with your brain and your brain learning what your hand is doing. So it's muscle memory, essentially. So the more you do it, the more your brain remembers. So the more you trace things, the more you're likely to be able to stop tracing. So nobody's going to tell me that tracing is cheating. Now, if I'm going to be selling a work that I've said to somebody, oh yeah, that's worth a lot of money because I have hand drawn it, not traced it, that's lying. So there's an element of cheating and lying there.
Sure.
But again, we're back to, most people are not actually necessarily at that point. It's there to have fun. There is a lot, people get precious with precious paper, for example. They might spend a lot of money on paper and then be afraid to draw in it. with your iPad, you simply tap it away. It's gone. Undo, 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 undo. I've undone in error before and gone, no, that's not what I wanted to do. The facility is there. It's fun. It's fun to share. You know, with digital art, you could have fun with your friends, play games, things like, you know, one person draw something and then take your photograph of it, or screenshot of it, should I say, pass it to the other person. They can then add to it, screenshot it, pass it to another person. You know, technology can be quite fun and quite instantaneous.
Yeah, digital is really cool, and it brings a sense of community whenever you're passing it from one person to the next, and allowing for each person to develop their own style and work with other people's styles, because everybody does have their own unique kind of voice and style in artwork. So I think that's a great way, and especially right now, since we can't exactly be in person with each other. Hopefully in the future again we'll be able to, but for now we can't really do that. So passing it from one person to the next digitally is a great way to get creative and work with your friends in an unusual but still fun way.
It's a good way to you know, get inspired, because you might not have thought of doing something, but when somebody passes you something that has already started, that, you know, there's you no longer have that fear of the blank page. And there's something that artists do that I'm sure you're aware of, because I'm sure, in fact, I'm not sure, I know you're aware of, is the ATCs. That's where people will actually physically make something 2.5 by 3.5 inches, and they will post it. So you've got postage concerns. And of course, in this climate, you've also got the whole you know, having to quarantine it for a little while and all that nonsense. So digital actually, you know, kind of negates that. It doesn't make it better than traditional, because I still love the traditional stuff, and I still love being able to, you know, feel that paper and smell those paints, and, you know, all the tactile and other different senses that comes from it. You don't tend to get the same tactileness from digital art, but you do get just as much fun. And so, you know, you can do just a whole you can add in photographs. I mentioned before I was a photographer, and you know, you can actually combine the two and have fine art photography.
Yeah, and you could even work off of your own photos, and you said the trace. Oh dear, guys, tracing is not, you're not cheating. She said it, I'm gonna say it. It's not cheating. It helps you build that muscle memory, but you could take your own photographs and trace those and turn them into a completely different artwork.
Yeah.
So lots of different ways. Well, we've had a great chat today. Thank you so much for talking to me about all things painting, maker related, and just your amazing process, and of course sharing your artwork with us today. I really appreciate it.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me. It's been absolutely fun.
Absolutely. So glad we could have you, even though our distances are far apart. I'm glad that we're able to, thank goodness for things like Skype and Zoom and all those things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. You're right. Yeah. I think it's really brought us together. Definitely.
Yeah, it really has during this time. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time, everyone. Bye.